MademmyifyASMR. Welcome back to MademmyifyASMR, and of course, welcome to another True Crime Tuesday. Tonight's video, I am talking about the Salem witch trials, which occurred in Salem, Massachusetts. This is also the final true crime video before my week of true crime that I am doing for Halloween. There are details of dates and which cases I'll be covering in the video description. Hopefully one of those is something that you are interested in. I've nearly finished writing them all out, so I'm hoping to get all of those recorded very soon, but we have just got a new puppy, and so he has been kind of taking up a lot of my time. Also, apologies if you can hear John in the background. He's currently got a work meeting, but this was like literally the only time I could record, and he's watching Rossi at the minute, and hopefully he doesn't pee on anything because John's desk is in my daughter's room. Anyway, on with Salem. The Salem witch trials are probably the most famous set of witch trials in. Oh, also apologies for the lighting. For some reason the light isn't as bright today. I'm not sure whether it needs to warm up. Sorry, the most famous set of witch trials in American history, if not world history. They occurred in Salem, Massachusetts between June 1962 and May 1963, and saw 19 convicted witches hanged and many others imprisoned. The Salem witch trials came about as a result of a combination of church politics, family feuds, and hysterical children, all of which unfolded in a vacuum of political authority. I'm just going to move. There were two Salems in the late 17th century, a bustling, commerce-oriented port community situated on Massachusetts Bay known as Salem Town, which evolved into the modern-day Salem. And 10 miles inland, there was a much smaller, poorer farming community with about 500 residents known as Salem Village. Salem Village had a noticeable social divide that was exacerbated by a rivalry between two leading families, the rich porters who were well connected with Salem Town's merchants, and the Putnams who sought greater autonomy for the village. They were considered the flag bearers for the less prosperous village families. Squabbles over property were common and arguments were rampant. In 1689, through influence, I can't get my words out this week, I'm sorry, from the Putnams, Samuel Parris, a merchant from Boston, by way of Barbados, became the pastor of the village's Congregational Church. Parris was a businessman and had been studying theological studies at Harvard, but he never graduated and was in the process of changing careers to the ministry when he moved to Salem Village. He brought with him his wife, their 3 children, a niece, and 2 slaves, a man named John Indian and a woman named Tituba. There is some uncertainty in regards to the relationship between John Indian and Tituba, as well as their ethnic origins. Some believe they were of African heritage, while others think they may have been Caribbean Native American. Terriss had shrewdly negotiated his contract with the congregation, but relatively early in his tenure he sought greater compensation, including ownership of a parsonage, which is a house provided by the church. This did not sit well with the congregation. Terriss was also an Orthodox Puritan. His Puritan theology and preaching divided his congregation further. A split became visible when he would routinely insist non-members of the congregation leave before communion. In the process, Terriss divided Salem into two factions, those who were pro-Terriss and those who were anti-Terriss. Probably stimulated by voodoo tales told to them by Tituba, Terriss's daughter Betty, who was aged 9, his niece Abigail Williams, aged 11, and their friend Anne Putnam Jr., aged 12, began indulging in fortune telling. It wasn't tarot cards or anything, it was one of those where you put a potato in some water and ask it questions or something like that. In January 1692, Betty and Abigail's behaviour, which was described as increasingly strange, some historians now suspect it was just juvenile delinquency, came to include fits. They screamed, made odd sounds, threw things, contorted their bodies, and complained of sensations that felt as if they were being bitten or pinched. Modern science tells us this behaviour could have been caused by a combination of a number of things, or a number of diseases such as asthma, encephalitis, Lyme disease, epilepsy. It could have been child abuse, delusional psychosis, or convulsive egotism. I hope I'm saying that right. The last is a disease caused by eating foods containing rye that has been infected by ergot fungus, which can cause vomiting, choking, fits, hallucinations, and the sensation of something crawling on the skin. The drug LSD is actually a derivative of the ergot fungus. The behaviour spread to other girls and young women in the community. The odd behaviour also mirrored that of the children of a Boston family who in 1688 were believed to have been bewitched. The details of their bewitchment were detailed in a book published by Minister Cotton Mather in 1689 called Memorial Providences Relating to Witchcraft and Possession. I mean, catchy title, am I right? This book may have been known by the girls in Salem village. In the February, unable to account for their behaviour medically, the local doctor, William Griggs, put the blame on the supernatural because, as I've said in previous cases where I've talked about witches back then, if you couldn't explain something medically, it was obviously witchcraft. A neighbour of the Terriss family, Mary Sibley, recommended the making of a witch's cake. A witch's cake was a cake made using rye flour and the urine of the affected person. The cake would then be fed to a dog. If the dog showed the same symptoms as the ill person, it was obviously witchcraft. A dog was used, as dogs were believed to be a common familiar associated with the devil. say a black cat is an association of a witch. Unsurprisingly, when the dog ate the cake, it revealed nothing, surprise, surprise. But Reverend Paris was enraged by this use of what he considered to be black magic. He saw it as a blasphemous act, denouncing it in church. Mary Sibley was banned from attending communion, though her good standing within the community was restored when she confessed her sin before the congregation members. Then had to raise their hands to show they were satisfied with her confession. Pressured by Paris to identify their tormentor, Betty and Abigail claimed Tituba and two other marginalised members of the community had bewitched them. Though one source I read claimed Reverend Paris had actually beaten Tituba until she confessed, which seems to be confirmed kind of later on. Sarah Good, who was a beggar, was looked down on by the town for her financial instability and debts. Because I suppose now, I was going to say back in the day, better not have debts. And Sarah Osborne, who was elderly and bedridden, but was scorned by the village for her romantic involvement with an indentured servant. I was trying to find out what an indentured servant was, and from what I could find, it was basically a free labourer. On March the 1st, two magistrates from Salem town, John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin, went to the village to conduct a public inquiry. Both Good and Osborne protested their own innocence, though Good accused Osborne. Tituba embellished her confession. She told the magistrates that she had been visited by the devil and made a deal with him. In 3 days of vivid testimony, she described encounters with Satan's animals familiars and with a tall, dark man from Boston who had called upon her to sign the devil's book, in which he saw the names of Good and Osborne, along with those of 7 others that she could not read. I guess at this point Tituba was like, they're gonna kill me anyway, I might as well just, have fun with it. The magistrates then not only had a confession, but also what they accepted as evidence of the presence of more witches within the community. This caused hysteria to mount. Other girls and young women began experiencing fits. Among them was Anne Putnam Jr., her mother, her cousin Mary Walcott, and the Putnams' servant Mercy Lewis. Significantly, those that began being identified as witches were no longer outcasts, but upstanding members of the community, beginning with Rebecca Nurse, a mature woman of some prominence. As the weeks passed, many of the accused proved to be enemies of the Putnams and the Putnam family members, and in-laws would end up being the accusers in a dozen cases. On the 27th of May, 1692, after weeks of informal hearings, accompanied by imprisonments, Sir William Phipps, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, interceded and ordered the convening of an official court of oyer and terminer, meaning to hear and to decide, in Salem town. Presided over by William Staunton, the colony's lieutenant governor. The court consisted of 7 judges. The accused were forced to defend themselves without aid of legal counsel. Most damning was the omission of spectral evidence, claims by victims that they had seen and been attacked father's travesties, said nothing, afraid they themselves would be accused of witchcraft for raising any objection. On June 2nd, Bridget Bishop, who had been accused and found innocent of witchery 12 years earlier, was the first to be convicted. She was hanged at what would become known as Gallows Hill in Salem village on June the 10th. On July the 19th, 5 more were convicted and hanged, including Rebecca Nurse and Sarah Good, who, on her conviction, said she was no more a witch than the judge was a wizard. George Burroughs, who had served as a minister in Salem village from 1680 to 1683, was summoned from his new home in Maine and accused of being the ringleader of the Salem witches. He too was convicted along with 4 others. He was hanged on August the 19th at the gallows. He recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something was believed a witch could not do. This caused some in attendance to question his guilt, but their protests were dismissed and he was still hung. On September the 22nd, 8 more convicted were hanged, including Martha Corey, whose octogenarian husband, Giles, had been accused of witchcraft. He had refused to enter a plea, and as a result, he was subjected to pena forte adjure. I probably butchered that pronunciation, which basically means strong and hard punishment, and he was pressed beneath heavy stones for 2 days until he died. As the trials progressed, accusations spread to individuals from other communities, among them Beverley, Malden, Gloucester, Andover, Lynn, Marblehead, Charleston and Boston. On October the 3rd, Cotton Mather's father, Increase Mathers, who calls her child Increase, an influential minister and president of Harvard, condemned the use of spectral evidence and instead favoured direct accusation. On October the 29th, Governor Phipps stepped in as the accusations extended to include his own wife. He ordered a halt to the proceedings of the Court of Weir and Terminer. In its place, he established a superior court of adjudication which would not admit the spectral evidence. Trials resumed in January and February of 1693, but of the 56 persons accused, only 3 were convicted, and they, along with everyone held in custody, were pardoned by Phipps by the May as the trials came to an end. 90 people were hanged and another 5, not including Giles Corey, died in custody. In the years to come, there would be individual and institutional acts of repentance by many involved in the trials. In January 1697, the General Court of Massachusetts ordered a day of fasting and contemplation. Fasting seems to be a big thing within the Puritan religion, as a way of showing repentance. So they had a day of fasting for the tragedies that had resulted from the trials. That month, one of the judges, Samuel Sewall, publicly acknowledged his own errors and guilt in the proceedings. In 1702, the General Court declared that the trials had been unlawful, and in 1706, Anne Putnam Jr. apologised for her role as an accuser. 22 of the 33 individuals who had been convicted were exonerated by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in 1711, and $600 was also paid to the families of the victims. In 1957, the state of Massachusetts apologised for the trials, though it wasn't until 2001 that the final 11 of the convicted were fully exonerated. The abuses of the Salem witch trials led to changes in the US court proceedings, playing a role in the advent of a guarantee of a right to legal representation, the right to cross-examine one's accuser, and the presumption of innocent until proven guilty. But what of Tituba, whose being accused started the whole trials? As the trials had progressed, she remained a prisoner in Boston as Paris refused to pay her bail. Later, Tituba recounted her initial confession, telling the magistrates she had made everything up after her master beat her to force a confession. By then, the trials had wound down, and the governor of Massachusetts had ordered the arrests to stop. Eventually, an anonymous person paid Tituba's bail and she was freed after 13 months. When restitution was paid to the Salem accused, as Tituba was a slave, unfortunately it meant she received nothing. She disappeared from history after then, but she has become immortalised in legend and lore, and anything that you look up relating to the Salem witch trials will usually have a picture of Tituba at some point in it. Anyway, that was the